The dust-laden wind whistled across the barren expanse of Wyoming Territory as Keegan Ross spotted a peculiar silhouette against the setting sun of 1876. His tired eyes narrowed, squinting through the amber haze of dusk when he realized what he was seeing. A woman, clearly with child, slumped against the motionless form of a horse that would never rise again. Keegan pulled the brim of his hat lower, urging his chestnut stallion forward. Dry earth crunched beneath hooves as he approached, cautious yet concerned. The woman didn't stir, even as he dismounted a respectful distance away. Her dress was torn and dusty, her face smudged with dirt and tear tracks, but even in sleep, there was something quietly dignified about her. Her hand rested protectively over her swollen belly. "Madam?" Keegan called softly, not wanting to startle her. She woke with a gasp, scrambling back before wincing in pain. Her eyes, a startling shade of green, darted between him and the dead horse beside her. "I mean no harm," Keegan said, keeping his hands visible, his voice steady despite the shock of finding someone in such a state. "Looks like you've had some trouble." The woman's gaze was wary, but exhaustion soon overtook suspicion. "My horse." She couldn't go any further. The heat. Her voice cracked with thirst. Keegan reached for his canteen, offering it to her. "Take it slow," he advised as she accepted it with trembling hands. After she'd drunk, Keegan knelt on one knee, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm Keegan Ross. I've got a homestead about 3 hours' ride from here." Sophia Sanders," she replied, one hand still protectively cradling her belly. "I was heading to Fort Laramie. My husband was supposed to meet me there." Something in her tone told Keegan there was more to the story, but this wasn't the time for questions. The woman needed shelter, food, and rest, and quickly. "Mrs. Sanders, you can't stay out here. Night's coming, and it gets mighty cold." He gestured to his horse. "You'll ride mine from now on, at least until we reach my place." Sophia's eyes widened. "I couldn't possibly—" "You can and you will," Keegan said firmly but gently. "That little one you're carrying deserves a fighting chance, and you won't give it to them sitting next to a dead horse in the middle of nowhere." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. Whether from gratitude or the reminder of her dire situation, Keegan couldn't tell. But she nodded, allowing him to help her to her feet. "I have some things in my saddlebags," she said, glancing at the dead horse. Keegan nodded. "I'll get them. You rest a moment." As he retrieved her meager possessions, a small bundle of clothes, a locket, and a folded letter. Keegan wondered what chain of events had led this pregnant woman to such a desperate situation. The West was no place for a woman alone, especially one expecting. But those questions could wait. He helped her onto his horse, noticing how she bit her lip to keep from crying out as she settled into the saddle. Then, taking the reins, he began to lead them toward his homestead, walking alongside while the pregnant woman rode. "Mr. Ross?" Sophia's voice came softly after they had been traveling for some time. "Just Keegan is fine, madam." "Keegan, thank you. I don't know what would have become of me if you hadn't come along." He looked up at her, his face illuminated by the emerging stars. "Sometimes the good Lord puts us exactly where we need to be, Mrs. Sanders." "Sophia," she corrected with a small smile. "Just, Sophia is fine." As they continued through the darkening landscape, Keegan found himself stealing glances at the woman on his horse. There was a story behind those tired green eyes, a story he wasn't sure he wanted to hear, but one he suspected he was now a part of, whether he liked it or not. The journey to Keegan's homestead was arduous. Despite the cooler night air, Sophia's condition made the ride uncomfortable for her. Keegan maintained a steady pace, occasionally offering words of encouragement when he noticed her discomfort. "Not much farther now," he assured her as they crested a small rise, revealing a modest cabin nestled against a backdrop of cottonwood trees. A small creek glinted in the moonlight nearby. "It ain't much," but it's shelter. Relief flooded Sophia's features. It looks wonderful. As they approached, Keegan whistled a signal. The door to the cabin opened and a figure emerged with a lantern. "That's Matthew, my ranch hand," Keegan explained. "Good man. Served together in the war." Matthew, a weathered man with a salt and pepper beard, hurried to meet them. His eyes widened at the sight of Sophia, but to his credit, he didn't ask questions. "Get a fire going and heat some water," Keegan instructed as he helped Sophia down from the horse. The ladies had a rough journey. Inside the cabin, the simplicity of Keegan's existence became apparent. A main room served as kitchen and living area, with 2 doors leading to small bedrooms. Everything was clean, but Spartanly furnished. "You'll take my room," Keegan said, leading Sophia to the larger of the 2 bedrooms. "I'll bunk with Matthew." "I couldn't possibly," Sophia began to protest. "You could and you will." Keegan repeated his earlier words with a gentle firmness. "You need proper rest." After helping her settle, Keegan left her to wash up with the heated water Matthew had prepared. He found his ranch hand in the main room, questions evident in his eyes. "Found her out near Split Rock," Keegan explained quietly. "Horse dead beside her. She's in a family way, heading to Fort Laramie to meet her husband." Matthew nodded thoughtfully. "Mighty dangerous for a woman in her condition to be traveling alone." "My thoughts exactly," Keegan agreed, his brow furrowed. When Sophia emerged, she looked marginally better. The dirt had been washed from her face, revealing a natural beauty that even exhaustion couldn't diminish. Keegan estimated her to be in her mid-20s, though hardship had a way of aging people beyond their years in this unforgiving country. Matthew had prepared a simple but hearty stew, and Sophia ate gratefully, though sparingly. "You need to eat more, for the baby," Keegan encouraged. Sophia's hand moved protectively to her belly. "I haven't had much appetite lately." "When are you due?" Matthew asked kindly. "About 2 months, I think," Sophia replied. "It's hard to be certain." Keegan exchanged a concerned glance with Matthew. If she was 7 months along, she had no business traveling across the territory alone. "And your husband?" Keegan asked cautiously. "He's expecting you at Fort Laramie?" A shadow crossed Sophia's face. He should be," she said, her voice suddenly small. "Thomas is a cavalry officer. He was transferred there 6 months ago." Something in her hesitation made Keegan suspect there was more to the story, but he didn't press. Whatever her circumstances, she was in no condition to be interrogated tonight. "You're welcome to stay here until you're well rested," he offered. "Fort Laramie is still 4 days' ride, and that's for a healthy traveler." Relief and gratitude washed over Sophia's features. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Ross Keegan. I have some money. I can pay for—" Keegan held up a hand. "There'll be no talk of payment. It's what any decent person would do." After Sophia had retired for the night, Keegan sat with Matthew by the fire, both men lost in thought. "Something doesn't add up," Matthew finally said quietly. "A cavalry officer wouldn't leave his pregnant wife to travel alone like that." Keegan nodded grimly. "I know. But whatever her story is, she needs help. And that's what she'll get from us." As dawn broke the next morning, Keegan woke to the sound of soft movement in the main room. Sophia was already up, attempting to prepare breakfast despite her obvious discomfort. "You should be resting," Keegan admonished gently, taking the skillet from her hands. "I won't be a burden," Sophia said firmly. "If I'm to stay, I'll earn my keep." Keegan studied her for a moment. "Fair enough. But not by straining yourself. There are lighter tasks, if you're determined." Over breakfast, Keegan explained his daily routines. His modest ranch ran cattle, not many, but enough to get by. Matthew handled most of the heavy work these days, while Keegan focused on breaking horses, a skill that earned him additional income. "I need to send word to Fort Laramie," Sophia said as they finished eating. Thomas, my husband, he'll be worried if I don't arrive. Keegan nodded slowly. I'll be heading to town tomorrow for supplies. I can send a telegram then. Relief flooded Sophia's face, but Keegan couldn't help noticing a flicker of something else, fear, perhaps, in her eyes. That day passed quietly. True to her word, Sophia insisted on helping with manageable chores. By late afternoon, she sat on the cabin's small porch, mending one of Keegan's shirts while he worked in the corral with a spirited young mare. Watching him work, Sophia was struck by Keegan's gentle but firm approach with the horse. Despite his rough exterior, there was a kindness to him that seemed rare in this harsh territory. As evening approached, Sophia found herself opening up more about her journey. She'd traveled from St. Louis, where she'd been staying with her sister after Thomas's transfer. Why didn't your husband arrange for an escort? Matthew asked the question that had been on both men's minds. Sophia's eyes lowered. He doesn't exactly know I'm coming, she admitted. Our last letters crossed. I thought he wanted me to join him, but then I received a letter saying I should wait. Keegan and Matthew exchanged glances. The story still felt incomplete. But neither man pushed. The next morning, Keegan prepared for his trip to town. Before leaving, he knelt beside Sophia, who sat at the table writing a letter. Is that for your husband? He asked. Sophia nodded, not quite meeting his eyes. Sophia, Keegan said gently, I want to help you. Truly I do. But I can't shake the feeling there's something you're not telling me. If you're in some kind of trouble. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded the letter. My marriage. It's complicated, Keegan. Thomas is a good man, but... She took a deep breath. The baby isn't his. Keegan tried to keep his expression neutral. Such matters weren't unheard of, but they typically led to dire consequences, especially in military circles where reputation was everything. He doesn't know, Sophia continued, her voice barely above a whisper. When he was transferred, I made a terrible mistake. I was lonely, and there was a man who showed me kindness. Tears welled in her eyes. I never meant for it to happen. When I discovered I was expecting, I told Thomas it was his, conceived before he left. He was overjoyed in his letters, but then... She swallowed hard. Then he wrote that I should wait to join him. I think he suspects the truth. Keegan absorbed this information silently. The situation was indeed more complicated than he'd imagined. What do you hope to accomplish by going to Fort Laramie? He asked finally. I need to see him, to explain, to beg his forgiveness if necessary, Sophia said, her voice strengthening with resolve. I won't have my child born without trying to make things right. Keegan nodded slowly. I'll deliver your letter. But Sophia, you need to prepare yourself. Men can be unpredictable when it comes to matters of honor. In town, Keegan sent Sophia's letter via telegram, condensing her longer message into essential information. He also made discreet inquiries about Officer Thomas Sanders at Fort Laramie. The responses left him troubled. Upon his return that evening, Keegan found Sophia sitting on the porch, her face pale in the fading light. You're back, she said with evident relief. Did you send it? I did, Keegan confirmed, settling beside her. Sophia, there's something you should know. In town, I heard talk. Officer Sanders was involved in an incident 2 weeks ago, a skirmish with some Sioux warriors. He was injured, but he's recovering. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth. Is he all right? From what I gather, yes. But it means he might not be able to travel, even if he wanted to meet you halfway. The implications hung heavily between them. Sophia would either need to continue to Fort Laramie once she was stronger, or she'd have to delay her journey significantly. I see, she said finally, her voice small. Thank you for telling me. That night, as Keegan lay awake in Matthew's room, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn into a situation far more complicated than a simple rescue. Sophia's predicament touched something in him, a protective instinct he thought he'd buried after the war. But her secrets weren't his burden to bear, he reminded himself. Once she was well enough, she would continue her journey, and their paths would diverge. Yet somehow, the thought brought him no comfort. Days turned into a week, and Sophia's presence at the homestead gradually transformed from unexpected disruption to welcome addition. Despite her condition, she insisted on contributing, taking over the cooking and mending, adding small touches that made the cabin feel more like a home than it had in years. Keegan found himself enjoying their conversations in the evenings. Sophia was well-read and thoughtful, offering perspectives that challenged his solitary mindset. He learned she'd been a schoolteacher in St. Louis before her marriage, and her passion for education revealed itself in how she would sometimes correct Matthew's grammar or explain historical events that came up in their discussions. For her part, Sophia seemed to draw strength from the routine of ranch life. The haunted look in her eyes had begun to fade, replaced by something like cautious hope. She spoke less about Fort Laramie and her husband, though Keegan knew the situation remained unresolved. 10 days after her arrival, Keegan returned from town with a letter. Sophia's hands shook as he handed it to her. "It's from Thomas," Keegan explained. "The postmaster said it came yesterday." Sophia retreated to her room to read it. When she emerged an hour later, her eyes were red from crying, but there was a strange calmness about her. "He knows," she said simply, joining Keegan on the porch. "About the baby. He's known for months, suspected at least. That's why he told me to wait." Keegan remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. "He says he still cares for me, but he can't raise another man's child as his own. His pride won't allow it." She laughed bitterly. Pride. Such a terrible thing. It ruins lives. "What will you do now?" Keegan asked gently. Sophia gazed out at the prairie, one hand absently stroking her belly. "I don't know. I can't go back to St. Louis. My family made it clear they wouldn't support me if things didn't work out with Thomas. I have some savings, enough to perhaps start somewhere new, but it's hard to start anew when you're about to have a child," Keegan finished for her. She nodded, blinking back tears. "Stay," Keegan said, the word escaping before he could consider its implications. "At least until the baby comes. It's not safe for you to travel now anyway." Sophia turned to him, studying his face. "Why are you being so kind to me, Keegan? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." It was a fair question. One Keegan had asked himself repeatedly over the past week. "I've seen enough suffering," he said finally. "During the war, after... I couldn't save everyone then. Maybe I can't save everyone now. But I can help you. And that's something." It wasn't the full truth, but it was as much as he was ready to admit, even to himself. Sophia reached out, placing her hand gently on his. "Thank you." That simple touch, warm and genuine, stirred something in Keegan that had long lain dormant. He quickly stood, mumbling about checking on the horses, escaping the unfamiliar emotions that threatened to surface. As he worked in the stable, Keegan berated himself for his reaction. Sophia was vulnerable, pregnant, and essentially abandoned. The last thing she needed was a lonely rancher developing inappropriate feelings for her. She needed security and friendship, nothing more. The following days brought a shift in their dynamic nonetheless. Sophia began asking more about Keegan's past, genuine interest evident in her questions. He found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his reluctant service in the Union Army, the friends he'd lost, and how he'd ended up claiming this patch of Wyoming wilderness after the war ended. "I needed space," he explained one evening as they sat by the fire. Matthew had gone to bed, leaving them alone with the crackling flames. Space from people, from memories, from everything that reminded me of what we'd done to each other. And did you find peace here? Sophia asked softly. Keegan considered the question. Some days. The land doesn't ask questions. It just is. There's honesty in that. Yet you opened your home to a stranger with nothing but questions and complications, Sophia observed with a small smile. Keegan returned the smile. Perhaps I've had enough solitude. As July gave way to August, the heat became oppressive. Sophia's pregnancy advanced, making her increasingly uncomfortable. Keegan insisted she rest more, taking on some of the indoor chores himself despite her protests. One scorching afternoon, he returned from working with the cattle to find the cabin empty. Panic seized him until Matthew pointed toward the creek. She said she needed to cool off, Matthew explained. I told her not to go far. Keegan found Sophia sitting with her feet in the creek, her dress hiked modestly to her knees. She'd removed her shoes and stockings, and the relief on her face was evident as the cool water washed over her swollen ankles. This feels divine, she said, without looking up, somehow sensing his presence. My feet have been so swollen I could hardly stand it. Keegan hesitated, then removed his boots and rolled up his pants, joining her at the water's edge. The cool creek was indeed refreshing after the day's heat. My mother used to say that when a woman is carrying, her body becomes a vessel for miracles and misery in equal measure, Sophia reflected, her hand resting on her belly. I'm beginning to understand what she meant. Have you thought about names? Keegan asked. Sophia smiled softly. If it's a girl, I thought perhaps Hannah, after my grandmother. For a boy. She hesitated. I haven't decided. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the water flow past their feet. Keegan, Sophia said finally, I've been thinking about what comes after. I can't impose on your kindness indefinitely. You're not imposing, he replied automatically. You know what I mean? Once the baby comes, I'll need to find a more permanent situation. She sighed. I've been considering trying to reach Denver. I hear there are opportunities there for women with education. I could teach again, perhaps. The thought of Sophia leaving brought an unexpected ache to Keegan's chest. Over the weeks, her presence had filled a void in his life he hadn't fully acknowledged. The cabin felt more like a home with her in it, the days more purposeful. There's a small town developing about 20 miles from here, Keegan said cautiously. Riverdale. They're building a schoolhouse from what I hear. They'll be needing a teacher by year's end. Sophia looked at him, surprise and something else hope, perhaps in her eyes. Are you suggesting I stay in the area? Keegan shrugged, trying to appear casual despite the rapid beating of his heart. It would make more sense than traveling all the way to Denver with a newborn, and... He cleared his throat. And I'd be nearby, if you ever needed help. The smile that bloomed on Sophia's face made the risk of his suggestion worthwhile. I'd like that, she said softly. Very much. As August progressed, preparations for the baby's arrival intensified. Keegan rode to town to purchase supplies, soft flannel for diapers, a small metal tub for bathing, and various tonics the apothecary recommended for new mothers. Matthew crafted a simple but sturdy cradle from pine wood, polishing it smooth to prevent splinters. Sophia's gratitude for these gestures was evident, though Keegan noticed a growing anxiety in her as her time drew nearer. One night, he found her sitting alone on the porch, her expression troubled in the moonlight. What's worrying you? He asked gently, settling beside her. Sophia sighed. Everything. What if there are complications? The nearest doctor is hours away. What if I'm not a good mother? What if people in Riverdale discover the truth about my situation and reject me? Reject my child? Keegan considered her fears. They were valid concerns, especially in a society that often judged harshly. I can't promise everything will be easy, he said honestly, but I can promise you won't face it alone. As for the people of Riverdale, they're mostly newcomers themselves. seeking fresh starts. Your past is your business, not theirs. Sophia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You've become a dear friend, Keegan. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. Friend. The word both comforted and stung. It was what he needed to be for her now, nothing more, nothing less. 2 days later, disaster nearly struck. Keegan and Matthew were repairing a section of fencing when they heard Sophia's scream from the direction of the cabin. They ran back to find her clutching her belly, her face contorted in pain. The baby, she gasped. Something's wrong. Panic gripped Keegan. The nearest doctor was in Rollins, at least 4 hours hard ride. Matthew, saddle my horse, he ordered. I'm going for the doctor. No, Sophia cried, grabbing his arm. Don't leave me, please. Another contraction racked her body, and she cried out again. Keegan made a swift decision. Matthew, ride for Mrs. Holloway at the Miller homestead. She's helped birth half the babies in this territory. As Matthew departed, Keegan helped Sophia to her bed. Her face was pale with fear and pain. It's too early, she whispered. Nearly a month too early. Babies come when they're ready, Keegan said with more confidence than he felt. And Mrs. Holloway will be here soon. She knows what to do. The next few hours were agonizing. Sophia's labor progressed rapidly, her contractions growing more frequent and intense. Keegan did what he could to comfort her, bringing cool cloths for her forehead and holding her hand when the pain became overwhelming. Talk to me, Sophia pleaded between contractions. Distract me. Keegan began telling her about his childhood dreams, his first horse, anything to take her mind off the pain. When those topics ran out, he found himself sharing deeper truths. I never thought I'd find peace after the war, he admitted. I saw things, did things. I came out here to escape, not to build a life. But then you arrived, and suddenly this place feels like it has a purpose again. Sophia's eyes, though clouded with pain, found his. Keegan. Whatever she might have said was cut off by another contraction, this one more severe than the last. She cried out, clutching his hand with surprising strength. Mercifully, they heard hoofbeats outside. Matthew had returned with Mrs. Holloway, a sturdy woman in her 50s who wasted no time taking charge of the situation. Men, out, she ordered briskly, rolling up her sleeves. Boil water, and then make yourselves scarce. The next few hours were the longest of Keegan's life. He and Matthew paced outside the cabin, wincing at Sophia's occasional cries. When darkness fell, they built a fire, more for something to do than for any practical purpose in the summer heat. Finally, as midnight approached, a new sound pierced the night, the thin, indignant wail of a newborn. Keegan's heart leaped. He waited, hardly daring to breathe, until Mrs. Holloway appeared at the door, her apron stained, but a smile on her weathered face. Mother and daughter are both doing fine, she announced. It was touch and go for a while. The cord was wrapped around the little one's neck, but they pulled through. Relief flooded through Keegan. A girl? Sophia had a girl? Mrs. Holloway nodded. A beautiful little girl with a strong set of lungs. You can go in now if you like. Just for a moment, mind you. They both need rest. Keegan entered the cabin quietly. In the bedroom, Sophia lay propped against pillows, her face exhausted but radiant as she cradled a small bundle wrapped in one of his softest shirts. She looked up as he approached, her smile weak but genuine. Keegan, meet Hannah, she whispered. Hannah Grace Sanders. Keegan moved closer, peering at the tiny face nestled against Sophia's breast. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a perfectly formed little mouth that puckered as he watched. She's beautiful, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Just like her mother. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. I couldn't have done this without you. When you found me that day, I was ready to give up. But you gave me hope. Keegan gently touched the baby's tiny hand, marveling when her fingers instinctively curled around his. "She's a fighter, like you." Mrs. Holloway shooed him out shortly after, insisting both mother and child needed uninterrupted rest. But as Keegan lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of Matthew's room, he knew something fundamental had changed. The arrival of Hannah had cemented Sophia's place in his life and heart in a way he couldn't ignore any longer. The next few weeks passed in a blur of adjustments and discoveries. Hannah proved to be a remarkably good-natured baby, crying only when hungry or uncomfortable. Sophia recovered her strength gradually, though the birth had taken a toll on her slim frame. Keegan found himself fascinated by the tiny being who had entered their lives. He'd never given much thought to children, but Hannah's small triumphs the first time she seemed to focus on his face, her first smile filled him with unexpected joy. Matthew, too, fell under the baby's spell, crafting tiny wooden animals for her when she grew older and volunteering to hold her when Sophia needed a moment's respite. As September arrived, bringing cooler air and golden light to the prairie, Sophia began talking more concretely about her plans for Riverdale. "I thought I might ride there next week to inquire about the teaching position," she said one evening as they sat on the porch. Hannah slept in her cradle beside them, her tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. "I could take you," Keegan offered. "It would be good for you to see the town. Meet some folks." The prospect of Sophia establishing herself in Riverdale brought mixed emotions. He was glad she would be nearby, not venturing far with Hannah, but the thought of her leaving his homestead created an emptiness he wasn't prepared for. Their journey to Riverdale the following week proved fortuitous. The small but growing settlement was indeed in need of a teacher, and Sophia's credentials impressed the town council. They offered her the position starting in January, with living quarters above the newly constructed schoolhouse. "It's perfect," Sophia said excitedly as they rode back toward the homestead. "Small enough to feel safe, but with enough children to make a proper school. And the rooms are larger than I expected, plenty of space for Hannah and me." Keegan nodded, trying to match her enthusiasm. "You'll be a wonderful teacher. Those children are fortunate." Sophia glanced at him, her expression softening. "You don't seem as pleased as I'd hoped." Keegan hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm happy for you, truly. It's just, I've grown accustomed to having you and Hannah at the homestead. It will be quiet without you." "It's only 20 miles," Sophia reminded him gently, "and you'll always be welcome to visit." 20 miles felt like an ocean at that moment, but Keegan forced a smile. "Of course, and you're welcome at the homestead anytime." That night, after they returned home and Hannah was settled, Sophia joined Keegan on the porch. The autumn air carried a hint of wood smoke from their chimney, and stars dotted the vast Wyoming sky. "Keegan," Sophia began, her voice gentle in the darkness, "I've been wanting to ask you something, but I wasn't sure how." He turned to her, curious. "Ask what?" Sophia took a deep breath. "These past months, you've been my salvation. You saved my life, helped bring my daughter into the world, offered me hope when I had none." She paused, gathering courage. "I find myself thinking of you as more than a friend. Much more. But I don't know if you feel the same, or if you could ever see me as more than a woman you rescued." The confession hung between them, fragile and brave. Keegan's heart hammered in his chest. He'd been fighting his growing feelings for Sophia for weeks, convinced she needed stability, not romance. To hear her voice, the very emotions he'd been suppressing, was overwhelming. "Sophia," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "from the moment I found you by that dead horse, something changed in me. This place, this life I built, it was just existence before. Now it's something more, because of you, because of Hannah." He reached for her hand in the darkness. "I've been afraid to speak of it. Your life has been upended. You've been through so much. The last thing I wanted was to complicate things further. Sophia's fingers intertwined with his. Some complications are worth embracing, she whispered. I don't know what the future holds, Keegan. But I know I want you to be part of it, part of our lives. Under the vast Wyoming stars, Keegan leaned forward, his lips finding hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. When she responded with equal tenderness, something long dormant in his soul awakened fully. When they finally parted, Sophia's eyes shimmered in the moonlight. What happens now? She asked softly. Now, Keegan said, we take each day as it comes, but we take them together. As autumn deepened across the Wyoming Territory, Keegan and Sophia's relationship blossomed alongside the changing season. Their evenings were filled with quiet conversations after Hannah was asleep, sharing dreams and fears, discovering the common ground that had drawn them together beyond the circumstances of their meeting. Sophia spoke of her childhood in Missouri, her early teaching ambitions, and how she'd met Thomas during a military ball in St. Louis. She confessed the loneliness that had led to her indiscretion, not as an excuse, but as part of the truth Keegan deserved to know. In turn, Keegan revealed more about his war experiences, the nightmares that sometimes still plagued him, and how he'd purchased this land with his military pension, determined to build something honest after years of destruction. By early October, their affection had deepened into something neither could deny, yet practical matters remained. Sophia was still legally married to Thomas, a fact that complicated their future. I need to resolve things properly, Sophia said one evening as they discussed her upcoming move to Riverdale. For Hannah's sake, as much as ours. Thomas deserves the chance to grant me a divorce honorably. Keegan nodded, respecting her sense of propriety despite his impatience to move forward. I'll ride with you to Fort Laramie when you're ready. You shouldn't face him alone. Sophia touched his face gently. You're a good man, Keegan Ross. Hannah and I are fortunate to have found you. The journey to Fort Laramie took place 2 weeks later. Matthew remained behind to watch the homestead, while Keegan, Sophia, and baby Hannah traveled in a borrowed wagon that offered more comfort than horseback. Hannah proved to be a remarkably good traveler, sleeping contentedly for much of the journey. As they approached the fort on the 3rd day, Sophia grew quieter, anxiety evident in her furrowed brow. Keegan reached across to squeeze her hand. Remember, I'll be nearby the entire time. Whatever happens, you won't face it alone. The fort itself was larger than Keegan remembered from his previous visits, a sprawling complex of wooden buildings surrounded by a palisade wall. They arranged lodgings in the small town that had developed around the fort before Sophia sent word to Thomas of her arrival. His response came quickly, a terse note agreeing to meet her the following morning at a small cafe in town. Sophia spent the evening in nervous preparation, rehearsing what she would say while Keegan tried to keep her spirits up. Just speak your truth, he advised. That's all anyone can do. The next morning, Sophia dressed with care in her best dress, arranging Hannah in a small bassinet they'd brought along. Keegan walked them to the cafe, squeezing Sophia's hand one last time before finding a seat across the street where he could keep watch without intruding. Thomas Sanders arrived precisely on time, his cavalry uniform crisp despite the sling supporting his injured arm. Even from a distance, Keegan could see the man's bearing was military straight, his expression carefully controlled as he spotted Sophia and the baby. The meeting lasted just over an hour. Through the cafe window, Keegan observed their conversation initially tense, then seemingly more measured. At one point, Thomas looked down at Hannah, his expression unreadable. Sophia appeared to be crying, though she maintained her composure. When they finally emerged, Thomas nodded stiffly to Sophia before walking away toward the fort. Keegan quickly crossed the street, finding Sophia's eyes red-rimmed, but her expression remarkably peaceful. He's agreed to the divorce, she said quietly as Keegan reached her. He said he's being transferred to a fort in Arizona Territory anyway, and a clean break would be best for everyone. Relief washed over Keegan. Did he... did he acknowledge Hannah? Sophia shook her head. Not as his. But he didn't deny me the right to give her his name. For propriety's sake, he said he'll initiate the divorce proceedings through the military courts. It should be finalized within 6 months. Keegan helped her back to their lodgings, where she recounted the conversation in more detail. Thomas had been hurt, but not cruel, acknowledging his own failings in their marriage while making it clear he couldn't raise another man's child. He'd wished her well, in his own reserved way, and had even asked if she was being properly looked after. I told him about you, Sophia admitted. Not everything, but enough. I think it eased his conscience to know Hannah and I weren't alone. They remained at Fort Laramie 2 more days while Sophia signed the necessary papers. On their final morning, as they prepared to depart, a messenger arrived with a small package from Thomas, a silver rattle and a brief note wishing Hannah a good life. A peace offering, I suppose, Sophia said softly, tucking the gift carefully into their bags. The return journey felt lighter somehow, as if a shadow had been lifted from their future. They traveled slowly, mindful of Hannah's needs, stopping frequently to rest and enjoy the autumn landscape. On their final night on the trail, camped beside a small creek under a canopy of yellowing cottonwoods, Keegan found the courage to speak of what had been on his mind. Sophia, he began as they sat beside the campfire, Hannah sleeping peacefully nearby. I know this is forward and perhaps too soon, but I need to ask, once your divorce is final, would you consider becoming my wife? In the firelight, Sophia's face glowed with surprise and then joy. You want to marry me? Even knowing everything about my past? Keegan took her hands in his. I don't love you despite your past, Sophia. I love you complete with it. It made you who you are the woman I want to build a future with. Tears glistened in Sophia's eyes. And Hannah? You'd be taking on another man's child. Hannah ceased being another man's child to me the moment she wrapped her tiny fingers around mine, Keegan said firmly. I already love her as my own. I want to be her father in every way that matters. Sophia's answer came in the form of a kiss, tender at first, then deepening with promise. When they finally parted, she whispered, Yes, Keegan Ross, I would be honored to become your wife. Their return to the homestead was celebrated by Matthew, who had prepared a special dinner in anticipation of their arrival. When they shared their news of both the successful divorce arrangement and their engagement, his weathered face broke into a wide grin. About time, he declared, clapping Keegan on the shoulder. I was beginning to think you'd never work up the nerve to ask her. The following weeks were filled with both preparation and anticipation. Sophia still planned to take the teaching position in Riverdale come January, but now they discussed how Keegan might divide his time between the homestead and town until they could make more permanent arrangements. I could sell this place eventually, Keegan suggested one evening. Buy something closer to Riverdale. But Sophia shook her head. This homestead is part of you. I wouldn't ask you to give it up. We'll find a way to make it work. Perhaps I could teach during the week, and we could all be here on weekends and holidays. As the weather turned colder, they focused on preparing for Sophia and Hannah's move to Riverdale. Keegan made several trips to town, bringing back supplies to make their schoolhouse quarters comfortable. Matthew, displaying hidden talents, crafted simple but beautiful furniture for their new home, a rocking chair for Sophia, shelves for her books, and a chest of drawers for Hannah's growing collection of clothes and toys. December brought the first heavy snows, transforming the landscape into a white expanse that glittered beneath the winter sun. Despite the cold, these were happy days, filled with domestic contentment as they celebrated Hannah's first Christmas. Though the baby was too young to understand the holiday, Sophia decorated the cabin with pine boughs and homemade ornaments, while Keegan carved a small wooden horse as Hannah's first Christmas gift. On Christmas Eve, after Hannah was asleep, Keegan presented Sophia with a special gift, a simple gold band he'd purchased on his last trip to town. "I know we can't officially marry until your divorce is final," he said, holding out the ring, "but I wanted you to have this now, as a promise." Tears filled Sophia's eyes as she allowed him to slip the ring onto her finger. "It's beautiful, Keegan." "It was my mother's," he admitted. "I've carried it with me since she passed, waiting for the right moment, the right person." Sophia kissed him tenderly. "I'll treasure it always." New Year brought Sophia and Hannah's move to Riverdale. The separation was difficult, despite the relatively short distance between the town and Keegan's homestead. He rode to visit them twice weekly, regardless of weather, and found each reunion sweeter than the last. Sophia thrived as Riverdale's teacher, quickly winning over both students and parents with her gentle but firm teaching style. Hannah, now nearly 6 months old, grew stronger daily, her sunny disposition making her a favorite with the townspeople who often stopped by the schoolhouse just to see her smile. By spring, as wildflowers began to dot the prairie once more, news arrived that Sophia's divorce had been officially granted. Thomas had been true to his word, expediting the process through military channels. Sophia received the papers with a mixture of relief and sadness, the official end of a chapter in her life. But also the beginning of a new one. They planned a simple wedding for early June, to be held outside the homestead where their story had begun. The ceremony would be small, just Matthew, Mrs. Holloway, and a few friends from Riverdale, with the local minister officiating. As the day approached, Keegan found himself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them to this moment. Had he ridden a different trail that fateful day? Had Sophia's horse survived a few more miles, their paths might never have crossed. The thought made him hold her closer each night they were together, grateful for whatever twist of fate had placed him in the right place at the right time. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the June sun warming the land without the oppressive heat of high summer. Sophia wore a new dress of pale blue, with wild flowers in her hair. Hannah, now able to sit up on her own, wore a matching dress that Mrs. Holloway had sewn especially for the occasion. Standing before their small gathering of friends, with Matthew proudly serving as his best man, Keegan felt a sense of rightness that transcended any happiness he'd known before. As he spoke his vows to Sophia, promising to love and cherish her and Hannah for all his days, he knew he was finally, truly, home. The minister smiled broadly as he pronounced them husband and wife. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Their kiss was met with cheers and a few happy tears from their guests. Hannah, not understanding the significance but caught up in the excitement, clapped her tiny hands from Mrs. Holloway's lap. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful, a meal prepared by friends, music from a fiddle player Matthew had invited from a neighboring ranch, and plenty of good wishes for the new family. As evening approached and guests began to depart, Keegan found a moment alone with Sophia on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. "Mrs. Ross," he said, the name still new and wonderful on his lips. "Are you happy?" Sophia leaned against him, her head finding its perfect place on his shoulder. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible. When you found me that day, I was at my lowest point, with nothing but desperation and fear. Now look at us. The best decisions I ever made," Keegan reflected, "were stopping when I saw you by that dead horse, and telling you you'd ride mine from now on." Sophia laughed softly. "I thought you were either my salvation or some kind of madman. Turns out you were both." Their laughter mingled in the evening air, a perfect harmony to end their wedding day. 1 year later, on a warm June evening, much like their wedding day, Keegan sat on the porch of their new home on the edge of Riverdale. The modest house, built with his own hands on land purchased with their combined savings, stood as testament to their shared dreams. Close enough to town for Sophia to continue teaching, yet with enough land for Keegan to keep a small herd and continue his horse-breaking business. It represented the best of both their worlds. Hannah, now walking and beginning to form words, played at his feet with the wooden animals Matthew had carved for her. Her dark hair and green eyes, so like her mother's, lit up as she spotted Sophia emerging from the house. "Mama!" she called, her favorite word. Sophia smiled, settling beside them on the porch swing. Her hand rested gently on her slightly rounded belly, where their second child, their first together, was growing steadily. "She's been asking for a story," Keegan said, lifting Hannah onto his lap. "I told her she should wait for her mama, who tells the best stories." Sophia's eyes twinkled. "What kind of story would you like, my sweet girl?" Hannah's face scrunched in concentration. "Horse," she declared finally. "A horse story?" Sophia pretended to consider. "Well, I know a very special horse story. It's about a brave cowboy who found a very tired lady sleeping beside her poor, dead horse." "And do you know what that cowboy said to the lady?" Hannah shook her head, eyes wide with anticipation, though she'd heard variations of this tale before. "He said, 'You'll ride mine from now on.'" Sophia's eyes met Keegan's over their daughter's head, love and gratitude shining in their depths. "And that, my darling, is how our family began." As the sun set over the Wyoming prairie, painting the world in gold just as it had that fateful day 2 years earlier, Keegan held his family close, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. What had begun as a simple act of kindness on a dusty trail had blossomed into a love deeper and more enduring than he'd ever imagined possible. From tragedy and loss had come hope and new beginnings. From a dead horse and a desperate situation had come a family bound not by blood alone, but by choice and love and the courage to believe in second chances. And as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Keegan knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, their love a constant compass guiding them home.